Robin Hensel, 807 First Street Southeast. Tonight you are considering once again a lease with the Franklin Billboard Company. I'm confused. In the packet tonight it says that since the structure was in existence prior to the adoption of the ordinance, I'm not sure which ordinance that's referring to, the billboard is considered a legal non-conforming sign and as such is allowed to remain. As of April 18th, 1918, there was a sign ordinance in this city that stated under section 7 that no person or persons shall hereafter erect, construct, maintain, or cause to be erected, constructed, or maintained within the limits of said city in front of or along the line of or upon any lot or parcel of land adjoining any street, avenue, alley, or public grounds within the city limits of the city, any billboard or other structure for posting and exhibiting advertisements of any kind without having first obtained from the council of said city a permit under the seal of said city to construct or maintain such billboard or other structure aforesaid. And no such permit shall be issued by said council until after public hearing, notice of which shall be published once in the official paper of said city. Such permit, when so issued, shall specify the material and construction of such billboards or other structures. Now, that's from 1918. Certainly this structure called the billboard, the Franklin Billboard, was not erected prior to this sign ordinance. Now, every ordinance since then has, or I should say, the ordinance that was in effect it was enacted, number 801, enacted in 1974. So prior to the signing of this contract, it was signed in 1984, and the city took possession of this property in 2006. So your existing sign ordinance of 1974 was in effect, and here's what it states. Unauthorized signs. The following signs are unauthorized signs. Billboard signs, except in this ordinance, and the exceptions are: billboards shall not be permitted in any zoning district within the city except specifically allowed within this subsection, which says billboards may be permitted along private roads within the Morrison County Fairgrounds property, and then it gives the location of that. There is no permit, no city permit associated with this sign that is associated with and has attached to it a public hearing, which was a requirement all the way back to 1918. So I'm going to suggest to you that by authorizing this sign,
thanks for carrying, Robin.
You may be doing another Support the Troops banner mistake.
Anyone else wish to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on to regular council items. Safe Routes to School presentation. Ted?
Thanks for making some time on your agenda. Again, Ted Erickson, the Region 5 Development Commission. As you know, about a year ago, the City of Little Falls was awarded a technical assistance grant from the Department of Transportation to enter into and begin planning for Safe Routes to School. We developed a planning team. It's been about a year out. Drafted up the plan. Before I get into the plan, I'd like to just take a little step back and talk about Safe Routes to School, kind of what it is, and some of the benefits of it. It's a national program, and it's intended to get more kids walking and biking to school in a safe manner, where it makes sense, where it's safe to do. The planning process goes through and looks at issues and barriers to safe walking, and then it handles also the transportation logistical issues as well as some of the health benefits to a more active lifestyle. You each have a copy of the plan. It's also projected up here. We'll kind of go through it. I'm not going to go through word by word. Don't worry, it's a pretty sizable document. But I will touch on the high points. A lot of introductory material. The planning team there is listed on page 4. There was input from the city, and the planning took a look at 5 school sites throughout the city. It was the elementary, the middle school, Lindbergh Elementary School, Lincoln Elementary School, and then both middle school and elementary school for Mary Ward. And each school was also represented on the planning team as well as members of the public. The county was also a participant. On page 7 is really where the plan begins with the overview. Talk a little bit about the history of Safe Routes to School. Where it began in the 70s is where it kind of started. Communities started looking at communities where there was higher incidence rates of students either being injured or killed on the way to school. Developed the Safe Routes to School planning method. Try to rectify that issue. It was met with great success. In the late 90s, the city of New York underwent a Safe Routes planning effort. And since then, it kind of spread throughout the country. Under Moving Ahead for Progress, federal legislation for transportation has provided funding for safe routes, and now each state DOT administers a safe routes program, as does Minnesota, of course. National trends, again, on page 8, talk about the health benefits. Focus a little better. Throughout the nation, of course, this is not new news. We're seeing an epidemic in childhood obesity, increased asthma rates. Part of this is due to technology. Kids may have less active lifestyles, and so the more we can do to get kids moving, get them eating healthier foods. Safety, of course, is another component. That's kind of that logistical transportation component. The environment is another component of safe routes. And my first thought when I read that one was, we're not the LA, we don't have the LA smog, so it's really not an issue we have to worry about in Minnesota. However, I stood corrected. There was a study in 2008 by the EPA for Minnesota, and that showed that there was a significant amount of impact from emissions, even here in Minnesota. Another factor that has contributed to the need for safe route schools is the land pattern and how schools have been developing. I don't think it's really an issue here in Little Falls. A lot of the schools are nestled, tucked kind of right in the community, in neighborhoods, but a lot of times we're seeing in different communities schools developing on the fringes of communities where the land is more affordable, school districts joining, and then you kind of got the mega school on 5-10 miles outside the community. It doesn't make for a very conducive atmosphere for walking and biking. Unfortunately, we don't really have to address that too much here in Little Falls. One of the things I find it's interesting to do when we have these kickoff meetings for safe routes planning is I ask the group, it's a room of adults, how many of us walked or biked to school as kids? Invariably, over half the group raises their hands. A generation later, you ask the same question, and it's, I've seen statistics up to maybe 15%, but in most communities it's lower than that, like 5% of kids walking and biking to school. Another impact is transportation costs. Increase demands on the road systems, as well as increase in costs of transportation. The more we can do to preserve our infrastructure, the better. Safe routes ops, so one other way to do that. Safe routes employs, they call it the 5E approach. It's engineering, education, and again, I'm on page 14 for those of you following along the paper. Encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation. So it looks at safe routes planning through these 5E lenses. And additionally, we'll get to it later, but the observations and recommendations we've made, we've also made those recommendations under each of the 5Es. Moving along, I'm on page 18, the planning process. Again, the city was awarded the technical assistance grant, and what that did is it allowed Region 5 to work with the city to facilitate the planning process, to develop the planning team. And then after we gained all the input from several of the activities that I'll mention as we go along, we drafted the report, and that's of course the report you have in front of you. Page 17 lists the meetings. We had a kickoff meeting at each of the school sites, and then from there, again, we developed the planning team, and we met. We had several working sessions, again, meeting at each of the school sites. Some of the, I call them input mechanisms we used. We used a parent survey, and that was administered by the schools. And later on in the document, it's a 16-question survey, and you see all the results of that survey compiled. So we used this parent survey. In addition to that, we did a student survey. That was administered by the schools to the students in class. And mostly it was just a raise of hands, how many kids walked or biked, or did your parents drop you off or took the bus. Just to kind of get that baseline count of how many kids are walking, biking to school. And again, later on we'll see those results. In addition to that, we did a community walking audit. Now, what a walking audit is an assessment of how walkable a community is. We'll select a segment around the school site. We did that for each school site that students are most likely to take. We try to get a variety of routes around each school site to see where, a logical route where students might be walking. And then we walk it, and I encourage folks when we walk it to kind of look at the route through different lenses. One, of course, through safety. If there are high traffic volumes, high traffic speeds. Look at it through a lens of if you were a student, if you weren't able, if there's a lot of parked cars, would you be able to see over those? Would you feel comfortable as a child walking it, or if you had small children as a parent, would you feel comfortable letting one along that route? And then another lens to look through, or to look at the route in, is if you're disabled. How walkable would that portion of the community be if you're disabled? And so the results, we'll see the results in the walk audit a little bit. And then lastly, once we kind of had all those input mechanisms, we did an assessment of issues and barriers. And that's essentially looking at all the data we've gathered, looking at the results of the parent survey, the student survey, and the walk audit. And then really having a brainstorming session about what issues and barriers we noticed. This section of the plan, I'm on page 20, is a community overview. We just talk about the city in general, the school district, Mary Lord's schools as well, and then the county. Also mentioned the state health improvement plan and how they work with schools. And again, they have the different areas of work as far as health and active living, which of course goes hand in hand with safe routes for schools. From here, we're getting into each of those sections that I just mentioned. This is the student survey results. So you can see the results from each of the school sites. The survey was administered over 3 days. It's best to do it during the middle of the week so you can kind of avoid the outlier days of Mondays and Fridays. Just abnormal student activity on those days, kids being in and out. So we had Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. This was done in late September of last year. The teacher rather is encouraged to record the weather. So the O there is for overcast and the R is for raining. Kind of cloudy week that week, looks like. Student tally is the total number of students that were recorded. Of course, you can see across the top there is how many walked, how many biked, how many took the bus. Family vehicle, carpool, and then transit. In this community, of course, was 0. And then there's some variable. So sometimes there would be students who who left it blank. Some teachers rather left it blank, so the variable is that last one. But clearly you can see the major trend that's not hard to see is that not many kids are walking and biking. The majority are taking the bus and or family vehicle. And I'm not going to go through each one, but really the same thing. There was really no outliers. It was all pretty much clear trend for all the school sites. Again, the parent survey was 16 questions. I'll just kind of briefly go through and just kind of giving an idea of the grade of the child who brought home the survey, gender, how many kids in each household, in each grade. This is the number of respondents, by the way. 70 respondents had 2 children. These numbers didn't quite line up each other. get that to line up a little better. 70 respondents had 2 kids in school, 34 had 3. So try to get a sense of how many miles the average student is from school, and if that plays a factor in whether they're walking or not walking to school. Again, I won't go through each of these questions because they're there for you to take a look at. So now we're to the community walk audit, and again, we did a walk audit at each of the 5 school sites. And there's a walking checklist that had questions. Those questions are here. Do you have room to walk? What's the condition of the sidewalk? Is it easy to cross the street? What is the driver behavior? How do other pedestrians act? The other lens I forgot to mention is just the aesthetics. How pleasant is the route? Is it a route that you would choose to walk with your family, or allow your children to walk or bike to school? Sometimes there's one of the things here is scary dogs. A barrier for parents to allow their kids to walk or bike to school. Again, I'm not going to go through each one. Each school site is listed here. The weather conditions were recorded. The route is mapped for each school site. For the middle school, well, we kind of combined middle school and elementary school into one. We chose a route from the northeast corner on 11th Street there, going north, and then came down and then back across here to the elementary school. And yet the reason we chose that route is listed here. Yeah, the route was selected for these 3 reasons. It provides the only access for students walking or biking to and from school from the northeast quadrant of Little Falls. Those 2 routes are essentially how you're going to get there. And then with high volume of residential properties, of course, in the northeast, ranging from single family to multi-family. So we assumed that there would be a lot of foot traffic coming to and from school during peak hours on those routes, so we wanted to cover those. And one thing I forgot to mention, in addition to the walk audits, we also observed students let out and pick up during peak hours, and then made several observations about that as well. We were not able to do that at each school sites, but we did at the community middle school and elementary school, Lindbergh. So each roadway is analyzed here. There's photos, kind of show what we had. We had a lot of ice on that road, of course, as you can see. Oh, we did this in the middle of winter for some of the school sites. For the middle school, Lindbergh, we did it right in the middle of the winter. We wanted to get the real feel of what it's like for a student walking back from school. Here's the analysis for Lindbergh. And then, like I said, I'm not going to go through each one, but it's all there. You know, happy to answer your questions on that. I'll jump down to the last section here, which is the observations and recommendations.
What page is that?
It is page 55. So again, as I mentioned, recommendations are broken out according to the 5 E's, beginning here with engineering. Just a bullet list of potential engineering projects that work closely with Greg to identify what the city already may have in mind for some of these routes. One thing that I don't have, this is actually not the most, what you have in front of you is the most current version, but the one on the screen is not. There's one other recommendation that's not on the screen, but it's in your packet here. And I'll read that off for those of you who don't have a copy of it. The first one, again, not on the screen there, is consider constructing pedestrian facilities, i.e. sidewalks along strategic routes in each school area to improve walking and biking roads on or near the school site. So again, that's in your packet here. Also, and the rest of them are the same, so install more visible and accessible bike racks, consider installation of speed devices, that's the traffic calming, the lights that tell drivers, which there are some out there already. Striping improvements, so just a wide variety of actions. Consider bump outs, which is bumping out the curb in certain areas, which again allows for parking on the side, but also just kind of creates that psychological environment for drivers to slow down as the road narrows. And it also gives pedestrians kind of an added benefit as they can get out of the bump out and see more of the traffic as they go. Education. There's the Minnesota Department of Health produced a curriculum. It's called Walk Bike Fun, and what it is it can be incorporated into physical education classrooms, and it covers walking, biking, and pedestrian safety. And so that's a recommendation, is to incorporate Walk Bike Fun curriculum into physical education classes when possible. Another recommendation is to partner with the Minnesota Bike Alliance. Minnesota Bike Alliance promotes biking, main focus on biking, also promotes a little bit of pedestrian activity as well. But what they do is your community can get designated as a bike-friendly community. They have bike-friendly businesses, and then they can also come in and do workshops on a range of topics, including bike safety, bike maintenance, things like that. Another recommendation is to collaborate with Morrison County SHIP Health for Life, or continue to partner with local bike clubs, local business partners, and do a bike rodeo. There's 50 stations that can be set up, and they close down a segment of roadway and have different stations. Kids can come get their bikes tuned up in the spring. A lot of times law enforcement's involved to bike safety or pedestrian safety. I've seen it where hospitals have donated helmets where kids can go through, and then once they get their helmet, they can kind of do a tour of the relevant bike. A lot of things you can do for education. Encouragement and education kind of go hand in hand. Encouragement, I've got established bike pickup, or I'm sorry, not bike, but student pickup locations for busing. That can get kind of controversial if the school kind of do kind of a moratorium of busing around the school site, like a mile or so, to prohibit, to promote rather, students to walk or bike to school. Or you can establish, like I say, bike pickup, or I keep saying bike, bus pickup locations throughout the school. Enforcement, a lot of times law enforcement is involved. In fact, police chief was involved with the planning process as well. They consider increased enforcement in regards to yielding pedestrians. A lot of times communities will have kind of a mini sting operation where right before school starts, they can kind of start doing more enforcement of pedestrian driver awareness, especially in school zone. And as far as evaluation, recommendations are to continue partnering with the school to do the parent and student surveys annually. And that way, the statistics we saw earlier from the results of the survey, we can kind of measure against those as these recommendations are implemented. And hopefully we'll start seeing a trend of more walking and biking. One other thing I'll mention before I get to the maps is another benefit to Safe Routes planning is there's funding sources available for communities who have gone through the planning process. So in addition to implementing all the 5 E's, especially for that engineering one, the state has, it's called the TAP program, Transportation Alternatives Program, and it's actually, there's a solicitation going on right now through the end of the month for communities to submit letters of intent for their engineering projects to get funded through a federal grant that pays 75%, which is 25% local match. For the maps, this is something we developed in conjunction with the school and city staff here. This is a heat density map of all the student location. We wanted to get an idea, and we kind of developed the routes that we selected based on this map. We looked at where the majority of students are living, and then chose the routes accordingly. We're actually talking to the school. We might develop 5 more maps. This is kind of the overall community, but we want to create a heat density map for each school site, tailored to each school site, so that we can see where each student is coming from to that specific school site. So there may be 5 more maps specific to each school site that we'll insert. But that would be the only changes. In addition to that, I've added a resources page. Safe routes, national safe routes to school, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. I've got the links, the web links all on here. Minnesota Department of Health, like I said, they put together that walk audit checklist that was used, as well as the State Health Improvement Plan and Region 5, the Resilient Region website as well. And the last things here, I have spaces for adoption. Next month, I'll be going to the school district to have ask the school board to adopt it as well, and then in addition, Mary Rose as well. And then as an appendix, you don't have that in front of you, of course, but it's the walk audit checklist that I mentioned. With that, is there, I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to anything in the document that you want to take a look at. I thought it was a really successful project. We had a really good turnout from the planning team, really active group, and so well fun project.
Do you think this is going to require more crossing guards in certain areas? If you have a larger amount of students walking in from certain areas, and we have to, and how would you handle bully issues if they start arising?
Bullying?
Bullying.
As far as the additional school guards, that'd be a kind of a capacity question for the school if they have those resources, but I think if that started happening, it's probably a good problem. Good problem to have, at least from a safe routes perspective, if more kids are walking. I don't know, I think each school primarily had crossing guards. I don't know if they were too capacity to require more.
Probably in the higher density areas right now.
And then as far as the bullying goes, I know that's something the schools are increasingly having to deal with. That might, that's an interesting question because it's bullying that might not be happening on school grounds.
It could be happening in road. Yeah.
So, and in fact, there's, I think I added them in here actually, the recommendations under, I think under encouragement, it talks about just volunteer community groups, along with law enforcement, having walking trains where just parents will volunteer to walk students to school, and of course that background checks and deal with that and whatnot. Or just with law enforcement, have a designated route where an officer will be walking. And so that would be a recommendation that could address them, perhaps the board.
Even registered sex offenders and that, they'd have to put that into play too, so you're not walking kids past these areas.
Yeah, and that's why I stress in conjunction, always in conjunction with law enforcement.
Pat, I just have a comment. Thank you for all the work and the help that Region 5 put into this, but also thank you to Region 5 for all that they did for our community. You're a really important partner of ours, and it's great. We appreciate what you guys do.
Great, thanks. I'll relay that to the commission.
Anybody else got any other questions? No? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dad.
Emergency leave, bank donation, personnel policy 34. John?
Yeah, it was brought to us in writing from an employee requesting consideration for the council to amend the policy allowing for emergency leave time to be donated to an employee for their dependent. Currently, the policy only stipulates that it's from an employee to an employee for the use of an employee's injury, illness, or disability. But upon further review and investigation, we found that Morrison County actually does this only donates leave for dependents. They actually offer long-term disability for all their employees, so that they won't allow employee to employee exchange, only employee to employee for their dependents to take time away. Our donation policy only allows for the use of accrued vacation or comp time to be donated, and it does state that it can be made voluntarily or anonymously, but I would recommend that that any change to the policy just make mandatory that the donation would be anonymous. But Morrison County also did a lot of consideration of this policy and wanted to, put in some stipulations and ensure that it wasn't being abused. And they limit the total amount of hours to be donated to 240, and they limit that the employee can only make the request one time in their career with Morrison County. So those are some other things to consider. Theirs is also based upon the Family Medical Leave Act's serious health condition definition. So that's included in the memo that I list. So there's, kind of puts some constraints to how they can use it as well. But I think with setting some certain guidelines and limitations on it, I think it should be able to police itself. And there's certain circumstances where people may make their requests, but maybe not want as much response. But if there are limitations to when they can make that request, they're only going to do it most in the times that they absolutely need it.
Any questions? Nobody? Nothing?
Is there a recommendation then that's coming forward to us?
There are some modifications outlined in the personnel policy, but they don't contain limitations. It's just pretty much a definition to add dependents. But I would recommend that you set some sort of stipulations to the maximum time that can be donated and accrued. There's a difference between what Morrison County has and what we have in terms of time off. They're strictly on a paid time off system now, so they do kind of change the ratio of time off based on the salaries of those employees. I think in the past we've researched, we've done some study or research on that here and found that just an hour-to-an-hour exchange is probably the easiest to kind of keep track of and administer on our end, considering the size of the employees that we have and the varying range and pay scales between those employees. It's hard for somebody to donate enough time for, if I were to make the request, that I'd have a lot of donations to be made to even get 60 employee a lot of time. They're paying based on salary. So that could discourage or inhibit people from giving what they would like to. So
when I was at the state, I think it didn't make no difference, if you paid $20 an hour or $25 an hour, if you wanted to give an hour, or at that time we could give up to 12 hours.
Yeah.
I see here it's 16.
Yeah, our current policy is 16.
That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And it's up to, what you want to give. We had people out there that abused their sick leave and abused their annual leave, and they had nothing. I wasn't in favor of giving them if they needed, because if you've been there 15 years and you only got about 8 hours on the books, there's something wrong. I mean, somebody that's healthy, because every time you got 8 hours, he was gone. Something, either whatever it may be he was doing. So, but it's up to whoever wants to donate time. So, I mean, if you don't want to donate, you don't have to. That's strictly a volunteer thing. So, but I think it's a good deal. I really do. We helped out a couple people out there that needed help. One of his wife had cancer, and he needed to be off with the kids. And the majority of the people gave for it. I mean, because he wasn't one to abuse it. He used all he had, so everybody was pretty willing to help him out. I think it's a good deal myself.
You know, it is, I think, a very important part of the policy. But when you're talking about a voluntary system where you voluntarily donate some of your time to someone else, I'm not sure that that should then be subject to a department head approval. Once we enter discretion into this thing, we could kind of muddy the waters a little bit. And I'm not saying there should or shouldn't, but it's just that, you know, if I, as a department head, think this guy's a really good worker and I like him, and that guy has a tendency to slough off, and if one of his dependents gets really sick, would I treat him the same as a good worker? So when you're throwing discretion, that gets to be a little bit of a concern. And I think your hour for hour thing is a good idea, because someone who makes $20 an hour donating to a $10 person doesn't automatically double the time. So I think that the hour for hour is good, but the discretion issue is something I think we have to think about.
Our current policy allows is at the approval of the city council, and that is not. It is something of consideration, but not something that I would recommend you having to change. I know in other policies that we've looked at, it was to the department head or the administrator's approval for the employee to make the request.
Yeah, they just have to get the request to the department head, correct?
Yeah.
And then we would do the final approval.
Yep.
Anything else? Did we want to add stipulations on there?
I would recommend setting a limit to the total number of hours that and our donation is on a per occurrence basis, so we have in the past allowed for one employee to make multiple requests, but I think those circumstances are going to be few and far between employees and multiple requests on there. It's like, and if it is really warranted, then I would feel really awful that the employee would get to make one request because they had one family emergency and now they've got the second one. They can't even make the request. You say they're 10 years apart, 20 years apart.
Well, and as far as I'm concerned, as long as employees are willing to keep giving, why do we need to control that?
I kind of feel the same way with the limit on hours. Why limit it to 240? It's not like we're paying more vacation hours as a city. I guess what's the positive for them?
Other than if they, we're constantly driving down their bank of sick time, and then they never really had much of an opportunity to take much extended sick leave. If those emergencies arose, then they kind of feel like they could always count on this donation, always need to kick in later. That's one possibility for abuse, but.
How much time can a city employee build up for annual leave? I mean, can they carry 100 hours, 200 hours at a certain point where they have to take it?
We can accumulate 960 hours of sick leave, and most of the employees are at 200 hours of vacation, and some are at 240, I believe.
That's the max they can carry.
Yeah, for vacation.
How much sick leave do they get a year?
A day a month, so 96 hours.
But the sick leave cannot be donated to another, that's only for yourself, just a vacation or not.
So if we're limiting to 16 hours, so 2 days a person can donate. Basically,
That's all.
so limits it to 15 employees, it could be 30 hours, be 240. How many total city employees do we have?
45.
45, 50, 90 hours. Right? If you have 45 employees, each employee can donate for 2 days, so it'd be 16 times 45.
720.
It'd be 720 total. Everybody donated 2 hours.
Well, and I think,
Are they,
one thing that we're not looking at is there's a lot of businesses that don't have anything. You use your sick pay. So, we've been saying, well, why shouldn't we? Because I'm going to have to abstain because it would be a perk that my wife could use, so I'll abstain from voting. But, we look at what a lot of businesses have, or zero for that. And so, to open it up on the other end, and believe me, my wife could use as much as anybody because we've been there, done that. So I'm thinking, why should we limit it? On the other end of the coin, there are some that actually don't have it up, so we need to look at it with an open mind, and I think we are.
what's the whole thing, somebody could be gone for 3 months from their jobs where, they open it up to 700 some hours, somebody could be gone for 3 months, and would we,
Well, once they use up their time, if my math is correct, that's all they can be donated, would be 90 days. That's right? 2 days per 45 employees.
Is that a one-time deal, or can they come back 10 years and they got problems again? Can they get a donation again, or how does that?
That's not a change in our policy. It would be on an occurrence basis. So if they had one family illness, that would be that would be an occurrence. But if 10 years later they had a separate family illness, or cancer or something that came back, the same one, that would be a separate occurrence. So.
And strictly the people that, excuse me, that they work with, if they want to. I mean, nothing says you have to donate time. And if you donate one time and don't feel you want to do it the next time, you don't have to. I mean, it isn't something that's, you have to donate time. I mean, that's strictly up to you. It's your time.
And keeping it anonymous, or confidential, I think will limit anybody in peer pressure
Right.
to whether or not.
I think that's what ours was too. Confidential.
That might eliminate the discretion concern. Because if you don't know who it is, you can't tell people who it is. But now LTD handles a health issue. Workman's comp would handle a work time injury for the individual.
Yeah, that's for the individual themselves. We're talking about a change to their
Yeah, so
dependents.
if we're adding a dependent to this, neither the LTD nor the workman's comp would figure into this at all.
Dependent considered your spouse or your children?
Yeah.
Spouse, children, and parents. Parents.
Yeah.
Your parents. Whoever's applying for its parents, not your spouse's parents.
That's FMLA, yeah.
Yep, based on FMLA, it's spouse, child, or your parent.
all right,
Just to clarify for Lauren, the city does not provide long-term disability for our employees. We have a voluntary long-term disability, but the city doesn't provide a long-term disability. So there's several employees that don't have long-term disability for themselves.
The county does provide it. We have a voluntary program to sign up.
What kind of participation rate do you think you have in that?
In the long-term disability, maybe 20%,
Okay.
not a lot.
So there's 20% of the folks that are taking steps to protect themselves in a similar situation, and 80% that are rolling the dice.
But we're not really talking about the disability issue. This is only for dependents, so the disability question shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
If we're talking about eliminating the policy from employee to employee, then we talk about disability. But this is only to change it to employee to dependent.
but it's still gonna allow employee to employee.
Yep, it doesn't eliminate that.
So we're adding.
It's just adding dependent based on family medical leave conditions and, you know, status of in the family medical leave of a dependent, and then eliminating at the request of the employee that the donation be kept confidential, making them mandatory. That's the only thing listed in the policy procedures, and then I noted some other items to consider, but there seems to be some.
So what's your guys' input on limiting the hours, the maximum hours? Do we want to limit it or do we want to leave it open?
I had a former employer, private sector, where we wanted to do this for a coworker, his dad was dying, and the company, you could do it employee to employee. But, you know, this poor guy was trying to take care of his dying dad, and he ran through everything he had. And we had all kinds of people that were willing to, 16 hours, 24 hours, whatever it was, sure, I'll donate, the company. You know, so we took a bunch of time off unpaid, and was in a bad spot for quite a while after that.
So is that was the only one we had to decide if we were to do anything with, right? So limit the number.
Those were the items of consideration if you wanted to limit the number of times or whether or not you wanted to change it from the council approval, but hey.
It's kind of limited already by 45 employees. It's not like county or they're hundreds.
So do you want to leave it with come to the council to approve it? Or do you want to change it to the city administrator?
Council.
Mr. Chairman, the only question I have on that is, how in the world are you going to tell one person yes and one person no?
Right. So basically, it's
I mean, that's
a legality to come with a request that it's actually a legit request is about the only thing you can. So leave that to the administrator if they can provide a request.
I would just be concerned.
Right.
What criteria in the world are you going to tell one person, your dying mother, you can go, and your dying father, your dying wife, you can't go?
Right.
We're not even allowed to acknowledge what they can't say what the illness is.
Why should it even come to us? Why shouldn't it just, because we've got the guidelines here.
Right.
You know, when they do it in the school system, they don't send it to the school board for approval. It's done by the HR director or the superintendent. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it comes.
I think it's to the administrator.
Yeah.
The administrator, it's.
Keep it more private if it doesn't come here, and you would think you'd take care of it.
Well, I would just say if they've met the criteria,
Right.
set your criteria.
Right.
If they've met it, give it to them. Because
Right.
again, I don't know when you're going to tell us and how you're going to legitimize telling one yes, one no.
Right.
So I would say just set your criteria. If they meet it and you want to give it, give it. Otherwise, that's what I think would make the
What
most
did
sense.
John say?
So are we scratching number 2 then on here, or what's the?
No, they're still limited to donating 16 hours to someone.
Right.
But we're not limiting how many hours can be donated to them, other than
45 employees all donated 16, that would be how many?
90 days.
The criteria is already set, or
It's
the family medical?
it's based on serious health condition of the family
Like
member.
life-threatening.
Outlined, which is outlined in the
Okay.
memo.
So what happens after 90 days or 3 months when the situation hasn't been resolved? And there's unpaid time off for FMLA?
Okay, it's on the agenda.
So the only change is to take out scratch council and add change it to administrator.
Well, I think that's in the action request.
Take off 240.
No, it's not listed. That was only a recommendation
Oh,
or
right.
memo to
Okay.
consider.
Right.
It wasn't included in the policy change.
And it's, each donor can only donate 16 hours.
Per
That's what I
occurrence.
understand.
Yes.
Per occurrence. It says to an employee who is recipient, so that almost makes it sound, it doesn't say per occurrence. Here.
Number 3.
Okay, the donation is per occurrence. Okay.
Okay, on City Code Chapter 2 recap.
Ian, do you want to add?
Well, you know, I included the information in your packet as far as what the changes, the major changes to Chapter 2 is. It's part of this information we got from American Legal Publishing Corporation as far as codification of our ordinances that was done about a year and a half ago now, and these are the major adjustments to Chapter 2. Probably during the open meeting articulate what these changes are, but you've seen them. If you have any questions, let us know. The three of us at the table back here have gone through this ordinance several times and matched it up with our current ordinance. It's a little in different locations than our current ordinance, but it covers it, and it covers what the League of Minnesota Cities recommended we have in this ordinance.
Any questions on it? Move on, Franklin Outdoor Advertising Lease Agreement. Administrator, Finance Officer, Dan, Lori, John, Tony.
Ben Olson did do complete research on the ordinance and found that the 1974 ordinance did allow for advertising, in parentheses, billboard signs. There were some stipulations on which zone if the sign was included in as to its size and regulation. He did find a permit for this sign being built in 1984 and in 1985 when it was changed. And he also found a memo acknowledging the moratorium on signs in 1983. So during 1974 to 1993, signs were allowable by permit, and the permits were issued for this sign.
Any questions?
I just have one comment. You know, the ordinance was made originally because we didn't want billboard signs within city limits because of appearance and the nature of the city and stuff. I also understand that you do get a benefit from this one. But if we're going to look at that, what outweighs what the ordinance for why it was put in there or the benefit we're getting from it. Why don't we open it up to more billboards in other areas so we do get more benefits?
It's one that I do.
So,
you put a couple more on city property out there.
you know, and we are in times where every benefit we get is good for the city, helps us out, but I think I'm going to go against this just because of the original intent of the ordinance.
Well, then, what I would say is, I know those other ones are grandfathered in, and, you know, it's like using Clearasil to get pimple out of your face. What's one more pimple? You know, if we're not going to wipe them all out, why take down the one that could benefit us? And, you know, when Tony had said that, you know, if we would, it would be for our benefit, it's not truly for our benefit. I understand what she meant by the city's benefit, but it's a taxpayer's benefit because it's going to, we're going to be able to advertise and hopefully get more people to our zoo. We're going to get more people to our golf course, to our CVB. I think it's going to be good for our community. I think it has benefits for us, so I will be supporting.
Anybody else got any questions or concerns? Outdoor camping, city parks? John?
Mayor had spoke to me about asking us to take a look in, our current ordinance doesn't allow for camping in any city parks overnight. However, there's the tram bike tours coming through Little Falls next year, bringing 800 to 1,000 bicyclists through the city. And you know, there are certain times where consideration of allowing for the ordinance to be not enforced for certain specific events is, you know, certain criteria can bring about that change. So this is something that possibly bringing recommendation from the Parks and Rec Committee, having them considering if they want to put in some guidelines for that, or bring in some considerations about it. But Trim is a big tourist, very big event, brings a lot of people in here. They tend to stay for quite a while. If they have time to stop, that's good for the city on a lot of levels. So it's definitely something that I would ask for the Parks and Rec Committee to give us some further recommendations. So.
I had heard from Jen Lassar at the CBB, and they had contacted her and said that pretty much is, she just called me again a week ago, and she said they're coming here, they really want to be able to camp there as part of the deal, and I know what the policy is, and that's when I had spoken with John and said, is there something we can do with this? And I had thought maybe that's a park board recommendation, so we talked about it. So I just asked him to bring it forward, and if the council thinks it's a bad idea, speak up. And but I think would be sad to turn down 800 to 1,000 bikers. I know what happened when they had that ban, and I think there was only 200 to 300, and the ballroom catered a couple times. They were all over downtown, and it's amazing every time those people come in where they say, well, geez, I've driven through Little Falls numerous times. Even a gentleman, a couple guys we met with today, this morning on something, said, I'd never stopped in Little Falls before. I didn't know that's the Mississippi going through here. He said, God, you guys got a beautiful town. And so the more we can showcase it, I think it'd be a travesty to turn away 800 to 1,000 people who want to come here and spend money.
If they're gonna look into that, can they look into I can't think of the gentleman's name right now, the owner of the bike shop, sent me an email a couple months ago, and I went and talked to him, and he talked about biking guides that they have out there, and people come through town are looking for a place just to pitch a tent, and each town has its information on there. You gotta call and check in at the police station. Some of them was, yeah, you can spend the night here and actually put the tent up in the police department lawn and clean up and bike out the next day. So he was inquiring, so if they're gonna look into that, I guess I would ask they look into the possibility of having a place for smaller groups on bikes coming through.
Not only is the Parks and Rec are looking into it, and they're probably gonna be giving a request to this council concerning certain areas for camping, if there's a possibility of developing such an area you're talking about. So they are looking into it, and it won't be too far in the future where there'll probably be a request from them. So.
When that tram came through a few years ago, they camped between high school and middle school, and they made use of the locker rooms in those buildings. That's outside city parks, and that's not even a concern that we wouldn't have to worry about. But I can see when you're talking about individuals and small groups that would come in, the school playgrounds may not always be available for that.
The last time the tram held one in Le Bourget, it worked real well. And there was a lot of happy people afterwards, from different communities. So I'm all for that.
I know they like that downtown location because they've got all the shops, all the restaurants, everything's walking distance or biking. We're rather amiable to that, so they could either lock them up there or whatever. But well, that's good to hear, Frank.
That complex also has restaurants within walking distance, very short distance out there. So that whole area works very well for that. But whether or not that can be an ongoing concern over the long haul, that's a different point.
Sure.
We've got bike racks downtown too now.
Yep.
Anybody got anything under other?
Also look at planning for setting budget planning meeting in November, likely off council meeting nights or Tuesday evening. So looking at it for further monitoring. Let us know if there's any kind of conflicting dates for that, so that we can get that plan.
Tuesdays are good for me, first couple of weeks.
Yeah, in the first couple of weeks.
It's deer hunting season, so anybody, just keep that in mind.
You're early.
Really dark.
After sunset.
Yeah.
That's when you shoot your deer, is that what you're saying?
So after sunset would be when you say meeting, so.
So what, the meeting's on the 1st, right? October meeting's on the 2nd, or is that first Monday?
November is the
Second.
second and 16th, so.
Well, then we've had times before where everybody hasn't been at one and then they've been at the next one, so. I don't know, you want us to email some info to you or you just take it down tonight? I'm pretty much will make myself available, especially if it's after in the evening. Because
If somebody has a conflict those first 2 weeks, maybe just email us, or you can email me and then I'll.
The second week is pretty much out for me.
The week of the 9th.
I'm gone on the 3rd.
9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, I'll be on.
anybody else?
Wednesdays don't work for me.
Tuesday's the best day.
Tuesday works for me.
All right, we'll take that, we'll give.
Take a 5-minute break, we'll be back.